Hi, welcome back to Frank's Final Review for this week's show. This week we're going to do a special, again, it's a holiday edition, this time for New Year's. And this week we're going to review a very special Jimi Hendrix show. This one is from the 2019 Jimi Hendrix box set, Songs for Groovy Children. This basically covers Jimi's four Fillmore shows, December 31st, 1969, January 1st, 1970. So it's a sort of a comprehensive box set. It's not a complete set. There were some omissions here and there, as I learned while listening to this show. So that was a little disheartening, but these things happen. I myself, I'm a completist. I would like to hear everything, as is, banter, abbreviated songs, what have you. I just, that's kind of where I'm at. But I'm still happy to have this set. It sounds really amazing. I did listen to some bootlegs that I have just to kind of compare the sound. And I mean, there's just this Songs for Groovy Children just blows everything away in terms of quality. Again, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a Jimi Hendrix fan. And I'm sure a lot of you folks out there have this set already, so feel free to listen to it again after we talk about it today. So I wanted to touch base a little bit on why I chose this particular show, and so there are four shows. I specifically chose December 31st, the late show, the second show. I'm a huge fan of the first show. Probably had my favorite version of Hear My Train A-Comin'. The first time I heard that, I was an undergraduate, and it was on the Band of Gypsies 2. A friend of mine had the CD, or maybe it was the cassette, one or the other, but it was the first time I heard that, and it was just so amazing. And then that was followed by Stop and Foxy Lady, and I believe those were called from the next day shows. But so upon hearing that, it definitely blew me away. And then, a short while later, maybe a few years later, I actually obtained my own Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies bootleg. Essentially, it was this bootleg that I had some studio stuff. It had some studio jams from the Band of Gypsies. And it also has some live cuts from the four Fillmore shows. Let's talk about the show that I chose for tonight, and specifically that's December 31st, 1969. This is the second show from Jimi's Fillmore performances. So he played the first show. Everything went really well. They played 11 new songs, if I remember correctly. Loverman had, the Experience had played Loverman, but it hadn't been recorded on a studio album, because the last album previously was Electric Ladyland, then followed up by Smash Hits. So anyway, that first show, all new material. Hendrix, he comes out on stage with a new band, right? He's got Billy Cox on bass, and he's also got Buddy Miles on drums, who's essentially had replaced Mitch Mitchell for this particular formula, if you will. So it's a new sound, and these guys had been playing for a long time. Going back to what we talked about earlier, Jimi had been playing with Buddy and Billy in the spring of 1969. As soon as Buddy got into town, I mean, those three guys played a lot. They played a lot, and they were playing off and on through the rest of 1969. I'm not going to go into, essentially, Jimi owed a record to Capitol Records for a contract that he forgot he signed back in 1966 or 67. So there's a long backstory, as to why Jimi played these four shows. He owed Capitol Records a record, and so out of these four shows came the Band of Gypsies album, just a rock and roll masterpiece. So that was sort of, the end result, and so Jimi was able to satisfy that legal obligation that he had to Capitol Records. But here we are in this album, this box set, Songs for Groovy Children. gets released in 2019, and it's just, it's like for us Hendrix fans, it's like Merry Christmas, right? I mean, we get to hear this stuff, so it's very, very exciting. So let's jump right into the show, and the reason why I chose this show, truthfully, it has one of my favorite versions of Machine Gun, and I first heard that version. Just like last time when we spoke about the LA Forum, I first heard this version of Machine Gun on the Jimi Hendrix box set called Lifelines, that came out back in 1990 under the supervision of Alan Douglas. Again, rather controversial in terms of the way he handled Jimi's catalog for all those years. Me being a younger person at that time, it was sort of a revelation, really, and like so many things on that box set, I just heard because a lot of it was edited, but one of the pieces was Machine Gun, and it took me a long time to sort of figure out where exactly that Machine Gun came from. And he, Alan Douglas mentioned in the notes that it came from the December 31st, 1969, but he didn't say what set, he didn't say early show or late show or whatever. So anyway, over time, I'm hearing a lot of bootlegs, and I finally figured it out. Okay, yeah, it came from 12/31/69, the late show. But that's really the main reason why I chose to review this. Out of the 4 Band of Gypsy shows, I'm probably more familiar with the first show on the first night, and then the 2 other shows. So I hadn't really listened to the show, and I really wanted to sort of dig in and listen to it with you guys and talk about it. So that's sort of the why behind it. So let's jump right in. And so out of the Songs of Groovy Children, it's an 8 LP set. So these are the 2 LPs that essentially comprise the December 31st, 1969 late show. So we have those 2 records, and there were some omissions. I mentioned that earlier, and I was a little, frankly, I was a little tripped out earlier when I was listening to it. For some reason I thought that this box set was unedited, that there were no omissions, that it was just everything as is, but obviously that's not the case. So I just want to touch base a little bit about those omissions. So Stepping Stone was omitted, followed by Burning Desire, and that was omitted. And that ended up being, I think Jimi made it 2.5 minutes into the song and then just decided to end it. So they probably thought, well, let's just keep it off the box set. And then after Machine Gun, Power of Soul, that one was omitted. And then the very last 2 songs, the encore songs from this show, December 31st, 1969, the late show, for whatever reason, they omitted Voodoo Child and Purple Haze. Those were the 2 encores. So that's a little bit about the songs that were omitted, and I may touch base on those again as we go through, just for continuity. But it was kind of interesting. I wanted to go back and listen to the bootleg versions, just to see why. There may have been some. There may have been some microphone issues. I've heard a lot of rumors about gremlins, technical gremlins with these shows. So, who knows? Maybe there were there just wasn't enough there, or they just said the quality wasn't there, if you will. So anyway, so let's jump right into the show. Okay, we hear the New Year's Eve countdown, and you can hear the Fillmore East MC, I forget his name, but he says, "Happy New Year, everybody, a very happy New Year." And there's some editing because I listened to it back on the bootleg, and there's longer gaps and things like that. But I want to give Experience Hendrix credit because I feel like they do a good job mastering. They only have so much time on a record, so why not edit it and try to make it as smooth as possible for the listener? So I thought they did a good job with that. So after that, you can hear Jimi. He comes in sliding. He's sliding down the neck with he's kind of mimicking laughter with his guitar, and then he goes right into sort of an instrumental version of the New Year's Eve traditional song Auld Lang Syne. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. And then they go right into this sort of this new Happy New Year song, if you will. It's also worth noting that they did record an extended medley. This was almost 2 weeks before, back on the 19th of December of 1969. They were rehearsing at Baggy's studio, and they did record Little Drummer Boy, Silent Night, Auld Lang Syne, did a 7 or an 8 minute extended version of that. Really just powerful. So that was nice. So they had this music, they had been playing this stuff, and they knew the song. They probably rehearsed it at soundcheck as well, that afternoon or the previous day. Jimmy plays, he's got some nice lines with feedback. I mean, right off the back, you're hearing the classic Jimmy, his feedback, and he's manipulating it with his tremolo bar. He sounds really great. He goes back up into higher registers, and he's kind of alternating, between like blues laden solos and feedback. It reminded me of a story where, Jimmy I think he was in London in December 31st, 1967. So 2 years prior to this show, he was in London, and he was at a club somewhere in London. But anyway, there was a huge jam on Auld Lang Syne. And again, I know I'm butchering the pronunciation of that, so I do apologize. So 2 years prior, he's in London. Here he is back in New York City with a new band, and really the dawn of a new decade. So very exciting time for Jimmy. So he's doing these really long feedback manipulations, which I really love. I love hearing Jimmy's guitar, crying and screaming, and he's, just hammering on his guitar on the tremolo bar, and it creates a really cool effect. So there's a lot of that going on. He's kind of mixing that up with blues, kind of bluesier runs, if you will. There is a point where it goes into double time, and Jimmy's he's really on point. You can get a feel for how close he is musically with Jimmy, with Billy, the new bass player, and Buddy Miles on drums. And Jimmy's got these just crying, howling lines, and the feedback's just howling for the outro. And then there was a line I really try to sort of decode, or I try to decipher what Jimmy's saying in between songs, and it sounds like he said, "Don't forget to club." I don't know. I couldn't really understand what he said, but then they segue right into "Who Knows," and then Jimmy sings "Happy New Year, everybody," and just a really cool riff. So "Who Knows," you're probably familiar with that from the Band of Gypsies, on the Band of Gypsies album. This is the opening song here after the introduction, the holiday song. And then some of the lyrics I thought were interesting. Jimmy sings, "Happy New Year, goodbye 69. What you can do for me is kiss my behind. 69." So I think 69 was a tough year for Jimmy. Thinking back, he was probably like Good Riddance. Especially in the fall of '69, it was really a tough period for Hendrix. He wasn't gigging necessarily. His manager Michael Jeffrey wanted to line up tours. I mean, Jeffrey was always, in that sort of how can I make money off Jimmy mentality. I think he put together tours, or tried to put together a fall tour for Jimmy, and Jimmy just wasn't having it. Jimmy knew, he was sort of in a new direction, and he just needed some time off. So we'll get into that anyway. So Jimmy plays a really nice first solo. I mean, it's just Buddy and Billy create a really nice pocket for Jimmy, and Jimmy's the melodic master, right? You can hear he's alternating between octave runs. You can feel this sort of swagger with his band, and you can kind of get a feel for Jimmy's full arsenal. I mean, he's mixing it up with single note lines, bends, tremolo, manipulations. I mean, he's throwing it all out there. He's just such a dynamic player. Then we hear some higher pitch squeals and just more, almost crying like notes back into the main riff. And then Jimmy goes back into more vocals, and that's followed by more call and response, which really sounds wonderful. Jimmy mimics laughter. He's he's so brilliant on his guitar. I mean, he can mimic the human voice, right? So he mimics laughter. He's just, and the one thing that I've always sort of that I learned from Hendrix, especially from a musicianship perspective, is like the intent is there, right? Like you can feel that Jimi is just, he's so into it, and the intention is pure. You can feel that through the recording. Buddy's chiming in on the background vocals, and Jimi comes up with some more tasty lines, and you can hear him clicking on his wah-wah, and it's pretty saturated. Jimi says, I hope you don't mind us jamming a little bit. We're just messing around, see what we're going to play next. The crowd loves it. So here, here's where some of the omissions are. So if this was a complete show without any edits, we would go into Stepping Stone, and I first heard that song on Kiss the Sky. I believe it was released as a single in early 1970, but it didn't chart very well. Jimi's singles, he didn't do well in singles. He did at the very beginning, but some of his other singles just didn't take off. That was the case here with Stepping Stone, but still kind of a cool song. And then that was followed by Burning Desire, which is a newer Hendrix song at the time. And then for whatever reason, they make it 2.5 minutes, and then Jimi decides that he doesn't want to play that anymore, which leads us back into back into the record. So we hear Fire, and going back to the early show, this is the first Jimi Hendrix Experience song we hear with the band of Gypsies, because everything else we've heard, other than Loverman and Hear My Train A Comin', those two songs were performed by the Experience, but Fire is really what, when you think of Fire, that's Mitch and Noel, right? Especially this is a Mitch Mitchell song, right? So this is Jimi counts it off, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. They go right into Fire, and I noticed right away, interesting background vocals from Buddy. It's just like some really wild juxtapositions here, right? You have Buddy Miles, and I mean, I've heard Mitch play Fire, so it's like a Mitch Mitchell song. So it's interesting to hear Buddy singing. Usually you hear Noel. Noel's pretty prominent on the chorus and stuff, but it's Buddy here. Billy's doing a great job on the bass. Jimi comes in, his first solo, just really searing lines, a nice long trill. And again, you're just like me. You're so conditioned to hearing Mitch and some of the changes, and Buddy's just. He's just not quite on par with Mitch's playing. I mean, they're two different drummers, right? It's not really fair to compare them, but in the context of this song, which is again, it's a Mitch Mitchell song, Buddy's just not as good as Mitchell. I'll just say it like that. Buddy's doing some things, different things. Then they go into it's almost like a mini scat like jam. And they're making it their own, right? Like, this isn't the Jimi Hendrix Experience. This is the band of Gypsies. So, they're playing essentially it's a cover song. Yeah, it's Jimi's song, but it's a completely different band, and so it sounds different. But these guys try to make it their own, which I thought was kind of cool. There's really a nice groove by Billy, and Jimmy's trying out some kind of interesting things rhythmically on his guitar. They go back into the outro vocals, and Jimi just, again, hits some pretty searing lines. So I kind of enjoyed it. I mean, again, it was different, but still interesting. You can hear Jimi tuning, and then you actually hear an audience member yelling, Voodoo Child, and then Jimi says, man, we're just jamming right now, all right? Is that all right with you? We have an idea of what we're going to play, so, and then he strums a little bit. And it sounds like, to me, it sounded like Bolero or Hey Baby, like some of the things that he played after he was commenting to the audience. It kind of had a Bolero Hey Baby feel, if you will, and that would come later on in the summer of 1970. But you can hear Jimmy's already, again, laying groundwork for the next year. And then he says, okay, we're going to try this thing called Easy Rider that we was messing around with. Let's see if we can get that together here. And then Buddy kicks in, and Jimmy's muting his strings before they all jump into this new tune. Okay, so Buddy kicks in, Jimmy's muting his strings, and they all fall in. And I really like Easy Rider. I don't. Perhaps this song was inspired by the movie. Jimmy's Jimi sung "If Six Was Nine" was in the movie, and I don't know if he just sort of continued to play off that, but it's essentially a brand new song. It does have some roots, it goes back to Noel. Actually, Noel Redding has some compositional rights in terms of his. I think Noel may have actually written the original riff, if you will, and then it just over time Jimi sort of took it, stole it, and turned it into something else. But I forget the name of that original Noel song. It might be called Summer something. I don't know. But anyway, kind of an interesting history there. So we got Easy Rider. It starts off pretty strong. Jimi sings one verse and then he drops into a solo, and it sounded a little awkward. It almost sounded a little too quick. And then he recuperates. He tries the first verse again. And then the second solo is much more on point. It's a long, hot solo. He goes back into the vocals. There's a cool breakdown riff, and you can hear Buddy and Jimi singing "Stone Crazy," and the music's kind of building back up again. This time Jimi does take a pretty cool solo, and he's got a great tone. He's playing in the higher registers. He actually does some higher vocal scatting as well. And then it quickly ends, and he says, "I forgot the words. I'm sorry." And then you can hear Jimi talking off the mic, and he says, let's play the Machine Gun," and then he kind of trails off, and then you hear the sort of the feedback moaning, if you will. He's probably clicking on some pedals or essentially getting ready to launch Machine Gun. And then he comes up to the mic, and Jimi says, "I'd like to dedicate this to a draggy scene that's happening right now. So the soldiers in Vietnam, we call it Machine Gun, go something like this here." And they go right into Machine Gun. And again, this is why I chose this performance. I wanted to review the show essentially just so we could talk about this song because it's such a great version. So Jimi opens with his guitar, and you can feel it's already sort of a military style sort of song. It almost has a taps. There's some rudiments by Buddy. It's like he's almost like in a drum line, right? Billy's laying it down incredibly thick. I feel like Billy's bass line is very understated, and it really holds this song together. It's just such a thick bass line. And then Jimi gets to improvise. These guys are laying down a really nice bedrock for Jimi to play off, and at this point it's like you can feel it's essentially a Delta blues song, right? I mean, Machine Gun, it is a Delta blues. It's comparable to Hear My Train A Comin'. It's just got a different riff, and some of the changes are similar, but at the end of the day, it's a Delta blues song, and it's like Jimi has brought the Delta blues to the 21st century with this song. Jimi does some beautiful call and response. Billy sounds great. And then Jimi takes the reins really, and he's really patient. There's lots of space. That's why I really love this version. There's just so much patience. There's such a great mix. As I was listening to the vinyl, it just sounded so amazing. Jimi does some really nice delta bends in the first position. And the music's still building, and it's building into the "I Fight Like a Farmer" line, right? And then you hear some haunting howls in the background where Buddy's kind of oohing, and so it's adding to the tension, right? It's a song about war and Vietnam and soldiers fighting, and with Buddy's howling in the background, it just kind of adds to it. And then Jimi sings "Over Yonder Lays a Mother," and like to me, I was getting visions of Southeast Asia, like this, like Jimi, and it's so cool to talk about because Jimi and Buddy met in the Army. They were in the Army together. I don't know. I don't think they were in the same company or anything like that, but they were definitely in the Army together. And so, I think I mentioned this too way back in the, the Hollywood 67 show in terms of, because Hendrix had mentioned, about, something about he wished people were, instead of rifles, that they had guitars and amps and stuff like that. So, But Billy and Jimmy could have easily been in the war, or they probably knew a lot of people or had some friends and family who had been over there. I know when Jimmy, made it back into Seattle in 1970, and August of 1970, he did learn of some of his high school friends who didn't make it back from Vietnam. So, this song touches on a lot of that stuff. Jimmy yells before he takes a strident, his first solo, and it's just, he lays it all out. There's some really nice effects on his Strat, and he's really lighting up the Fillmore. There's some single note cries. Billy just sounds amazing. And then some of the lyrics really stuck out. After a while, your bullets don't cause me pain. Stand in the middle of your rain. And then there's just more machine gun sounds. Billy and Buddy just lock in, and Jimmy's creating these sort of ghostly, sort of, surreal sounds, if you will. There's some subtle cowbell by Buddy, which I really like. Then Jimmy takes off again in full flight, and then this time he's literally flying over the jungles. It's like he's mimicking. There's loud feedback howls. There's Buddy's really cranking it up. Just more cries and moans from Jimmy. He's building tension. He's also creating these soundscapes of war, if you will. And Jimmy continues to build, and then he quotes Taps for his outro solo, and there's just more crying and screaming musically. Jimmy settles a little bit as Buddy and Billy take it home, and you can hear Jimmy manipulating his tremolo unit. I mean, it's just a powerful version. So there are a lot of great versions of Machine Gun, but this one to me is one of the best. I mean, it's just so powerful. And again, I just want to repeat why, because Jimmy is so patient, right? You have Billy playing the thick machine gun bass line, and when Jimmy kind of, like Jimmy, there are times when you can tell Jimmy's listening, and the music sort of settles down a bit. It's just I like that he's not always so busy the whole song. I think that adds to it. And then after the song, Jimmy said, "That was dedicated to everybody that's died and is gonna die. They don't give a," and then I'm pretty sure there's an expletive, and they may have edited it somehow. And then he says, "Oh yeah, Happy New Year." And then there's some sort of comedic banter. And so we have some more omissions, right? So after Machine Gun, it should be Power of Soul, but Experience Hendrix, for whatever reason, they left that off. We're back into the record, and so Jimmy's back on the mic, and he says, "I'd like to dedicate this one to the Cupcake Sisters sitting back there with the yellow draws on." And then they go right into Stone Free. This was really cool. I had not heard this version of Stone Free until earlier when I listened to this. I am familiar with the Next Day's version from the Late Show, January 1st, 19, and that's an amazing one. This one was pretty interesting. I mean, I really enjoyed this. So let's jump right in. This really, when you think about 1969, Stone Free was a huge part of the Jimi Hendrix experience, their live sets. There was a huge performance on the 24th of February at the Royal Albert Hall. Just amazing. I mean, Jimmy plays an incredible solo, and he, almost like in the LA Forum, the Spanish Castle Magic, he builds, he's doing this all on his own. He's just building and building. He's building ideas melodically, and he's building ideas cordially. He's able to build these musical ideas on the fly even. So it's pretty impressive. So that's a huge version. And there were other great versions. Philadelphia, the 12th of April, that one sticks out. And but that Royal Albert Hall version, hopefully that audio and video will see the light of day. It's ongoing. But there was a showing, and I'm just hoping that it gets released. It's just a beautiful performance. So it's interesting that so Jimmy, he's with his new band, and he's with Buddy and Billy, and they play Stone Free. And again, you can tell they rehearsed it a lot. You can hear Buddy in the background. That is why, on the background vocals, and Jimmy's pretty active in the chorus. I mean, this was Jimmy's first song, right? He wrote this. This was his first song when he was hanging out with Chaz Chandler, and they knew they were going to do Stone Free as their first single. And I think Jimmy wanted to add Have Mercy or, something else that he used to play. And Chaz said, no, look, Chaz knew from a royalties perspective, look, you got to write a song. You've got to start writing. You've got to start creating your own stuff. So that was Jimmy's first song, Stone Free. So here he is with his new band, playing his first song with his new band. Billy's holding his own. He's a really good bassist. I mean, you can hear in these recordings why Jimmy reached out to Billy, right? I mean, Billy just can hold it down. Jimmy drops into his solo with tremendous feedback-laden lines. I mean, the guitar is just screaming and crying. He's kind of mixing it up with the tremolo, and then he goes back into single note lines. He's just all over his strat. Billy and Buddy are really locked in, and Jimmy continues to play these searing lines, and then he starts playing some ascending lines. To me, it kind of reminded me of Earth Blues, like just sort of that building, screaming and building. He teases another tune, and it may have been a holiday. He goes back into more rhythmic playing, and again, this nice pocket opens up with Buddy and Billy. Jimmy's trilling his way up the fretboard. He's really free-flowing. I mean, this is Jimmy at his greatest. He's taking it easy. He does some nice octave slides, and we hear some more of that sort of classic 1970 bolero, almost bolero / Hey Baby. There's that electric lady sound, if you will, coming out. Then Jimmy kind of gets quieter, and the thing kind of quiets down. I mean, that's the thing that really impressed me as I was listening to this version is it got really quiet. I wasn't really expecting that. Jimmy kind of is holding back, and to me, it reminded me of the jam out of Jungle from the November 14th, 1969 at the record plant, where it's just Jimmy and Buddy Miles, and they do this like 30-minute medley, and you hear little snippets of like Hey Baby and other stuff that Jimmy was working on in 69 leading up into 70. So that this jam kind of reminded me of that, in that it was so quiet, and you could tell Jimmy wasn't really trying to rush anything or force anything. He was just playing as is, if you will. He wasn't showboating, or he was just and so from there, we hear Buddy Miles get to take a drum solo, and his drum solos, is punctuated by a lot of bass drum, and there's cymbals. Certainly not as dynamic as Mitch. We heard Mitch play a couple drum solos at the LA Forum in 69 and Tax Free, and then again in Voodoo Child. And you hear Mitch just, again, he sounds like an octopus. He's using all his limbs. Buddy just has a different style. He's more earthier, if you will, a little more simplistic, but still pretty good. And so he's got his drum solo going. Buddy, he locks into a pretty nice groove. The audience is clapping, and then the music kind of stops again, and then we hear more cymbals by Buddy. The crowd's cheering, and I think at some point, just based on the crowd noise, maybe Hendrix went behind the amps, took a little break, because eventually we hear the crowd clapping, and then Jimmy says yeah, and he's back in front of the audience, and then he goes back into some single note lines. Buddy's doing some more bass drumming underneath, and it's almost like a call and response with what Hendrix is doing with the single note lines and Buddy's bass drum. So that was kind of interesting. We hear some more. There's a tune called Messenger that was recorded at TTG, and if you can remember what that sounds like, some of the rhythm playing that Jimmy's doing reminds me of that. It's sort of in that Messenger style. I for a second there, I thought I heard him quote Stepping Stone again, which Jimmy was such a great improviser. I mean, he could hit on stuff pretty quick. And then we hear some more just really liquid guitar lines. His wah-wah, his Stratocaster, it just has this wah-wah drenched tone. They go into another jam, and then at this point, knowing these guys, I mean, I heard a lot of their music from from April and May of 1969. That's what a lot of this music kind of reminded me like these guys, because they had been playing for so long, going back to the spring. A lot of this music that they were improvising kind of reminded me of that. And then at one point, Jimmy starts quoting "Sunshine of Your Love," and again, this is like Band of Gypsy style. this was a huge part of Jimmy's set list in 1969, especially with the Experience. He played Sunshine of Your Love almost every show. I mean, it just became part of his set list. So this is kind of an interesting, it's like, does Sunshine of Your Love work with the Band of Gypsies? It's definitely kind of interesting. I mean, it's Jimmy, and it doesn't. I mean, personally, I don't think it's not like the Experience, but it is. It is what it is, and Jimmy just kind of goes with it. He reprises the Stone Free outro vocals, and you hear some nice rolls by Buddy. And then, to me, I mean, I didn't go back and listen to Easy Rider, but it sounded like the Easy Rider outro is how Stone Free ended. But it was just a crazy version. It was over 17 minutes. Just a lot of musical stuff going on. So very interesting, especially when you compare it to the next night's version. This one was interesting. And then the next song we hear, and I'm just double checking because of the omissions. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so we go into the next song, and before that, Jimmy steps up to the mic and he says, "Yeah, we'd like to feature Buddy Miles again for this thing called Them Changes." And if you're familiar with the Band of Gypsies LP, Them Changes is on here. This was written by Buddy. And the lyrics are kind of interesting because I feel like they are autobiographical for Jimmy at this point. Obviously we're all going through changes all the time, but Jimmy was in a new band. I mean, he was going through a lot of changes musically, personally. So I feel like this is the perfect song for him. The other cool thing, Buddy's doing the vocals, right? So we get to hear Jimmy play rhythm guitar and lead guitar, and we really get to hear his how much of a master he is. We get to hear him play straight rhythm and straight lead, and it's usually a combination of both, right? I mean, Jimmy's not the kind of guitar player that's just going to hold an A chord down and strum. I mean, he's all over the guitar, both rhythmically and when he's playing lead guitar, single note lines. So the two worlds definitely are fused, if you will, with Jimmy. And this song really showcases that. Jimmy breaks back into more rhythmic stylings. The music quiets. Buddy. I mean, I was impressed with Buddy's vocals. Sometimes when you read in books, and I've heard stories even when Jimmy was mixing the Band of Gypsies album. He thought that some of Buddy's vocals were excessive, right? A little too much, but I got to give Buddy credit. I feel like he sang really well, especially on this show. And I put in my notes here because I really like to hear, Buddy Miles had his band, the Buddy Miles Express, and I haven't heard a single record. I don't know what that band sounds like, but it'd be interesting to compare the Buddy Miles Express with the Band of Gypsies. So again, we're still in Them Changes. Jimmy decants into more rhythmic playing, and he's just heavy on the wah-wah. Jimmy and Billy are locked in, right? Because Buddy's doing the vocals, so there's more emphasis on Jimmy and Billy, and they're locked in. These guys are locked in like they're playing in the King Casuals, back in Tennessee, and I'm sure they probably played a New Year's gig or two together back then as well. So here we are, full circle. Jimmy and Billy get to hang out and play a New Year's show together. The crowd, and then towards the end of the song, Buddy, who's doing the singing, asks the crowd, "Do y'all go through a lot of changes?" And the crowd's kind of responding, and Billy's sort of getting the crowd going, and there's some nice outro recording by Jimmy. Sorry about that. And then Jimmy, as soon as the song ends, and Jimmy ends it with a really nice chord embellishment, and then Jimmy says, "Buddy Miles" on the hurry up side, and then he tunes. Jimmy's tuning. And then he says, "Yeah, okay then. The cat said we have a few more tunes to play, so want to try to do this thing called Message to Love." And Message to Love, this is the first live version since we heard the Woodstock opener. And I learned that there's a Hendrix researcher out there. His name is Chris Dixon. He writes some pretty amazing Hendrix stuff. His knowledge is very impressive. So I essentially learned that from Chris Dixon, that this was the first version since Jimmy opened it at Woodstock. So thank you, Chris. and I appreciate all your work, and all your stuff is incredible. Thank you. So they go into Message to Love, and you think about that Woodstock version. It was kind of a rough version, right? It was 8 or 9 minutes. I mean, it was kind of wasn't necessarily polished. There wasn't it was a new song. Here it definitely sounds more polished. They definitely smoothed it out. You can tell they rehearsed it very much. There's a brief solo by Jimi in between the verses, and Buddy's adding his oohs and yays. It sounds really good. I was really impressed. I mean, I was getting into this. Jimi attempts to take a solo before going back into the oohing, and there really isn't a solo. They go back into the main riff, and then Jimi and Buddy scat quickly, and then Jimi signals the ascending riff, the ascending outro, which kind of signals the end of the song. And then Jimi says, "We're still waiting, haven't finished that one either, thank you." So he's kind of letting the crowd know that, some of these songs are new, maybe they haven't figured out how to finalize them yet. But Message to Love does end up on the new album. So, and it gets pulled from the second show of the next day. But I really like this version. It's just started off really amazing. It kind of petered out at the end, but it was definitely working. From there, they go into the song called Stop. And the next two songs, Stop and Foxy Lady, again, I heard those for the first time on Band of Gypsies 2, right after that, Hear My Train A-Comin'. The first time I heard that from tonight's early show. So this is the first time, though, that I've heard this version of Stop. I'm mostly familiar with the Band of Gypsies 2 version. So that's the version that I kind of leaned into. So before I heard this today, I had not heard this version. So this is another new tune for Jimi and his band. And again, the lead vocals are by Buddy, so we get to hear Jimi play more rhythm and lead guitar. And Jimi and Billy do some background harmonies on this one, which I think is pretty cool. And we just get to hear Jimi again, he's such a great rhythm guitarist. We don't get to hear him play a lot of straight rhythm. There's a loud scream by Buddy right before Jimi takes his first solo, and it's a great solo. I mean, you guys have to hear this version of Stop. It's just amazing. Jimi plays some great lines. He's just really kicking ass. He's hitting some really nice notes up high. He's playing some great. He does some really nice things cordially with his chords. Buddy screaming, and Buddy's got some crazy range vocally. I mean, he's screaming. There's there's an outro jam with Buddy and Jimi. Jimi he's doing so many great things on his guitar. A combination of, again, chord building and single note lines. A second jam emerges, and so the second jam is really what I want to touch upon, because it's very subtle. There's some great guitar lines by Jimi, and it's like you can hear these really fat guitar lines by Jimi. The music kind of slows down, and it's actually really funky. And even in my notes here, I said, "Eat your heart out, James Brown!" ! Because this is just this is like funk, right? So it's interesting to hear Jimi playing like this with his band. Just really good stuff. And then the song quietly fades out. So especially that ending funk jam. I mean, this is a great version. Definitely on par with the Band of Gypsies 2 version. Maybe, they're both great for different reasons, but this one I like because, you could hear Jimi really funking out with these guys. And then Jimi says, "Thank you. You're all really out of sight, man. Thank you very much for showing up. It's really out of sight." He talks about there being a couple more shows tomorrow. And then they go into Foxy Lady right after Stop. Jimi opens Foxy Lady like he always does, with that loud, piercing feedback note, if you will. And there's some nice snare drum snaps by Buddy. Jimmy's pretty chunky with his chords on this one. And I remember the story when Billy Cox, when he first heard Foxy Lady, he said it reminded him of a song called Stomp Driver that he and Jimi used to play back in the Tennessee, back in Nashville, back when they were in Clarksdale or whatever town they used to hang out in, the King Casuals, wherever they played together. But they had an instrumental called Stomp Driver. And so I think Foxy Lady came out of Stomp Driver. So here they are again. They're playing their old song. There's some really nice bends by Jimi. And the last version that we listened to together here at Frank's Vinyl Review with you guys was the LA version, the LA Forum version. That was a really smoking version. This one is really smoking as well. Jimi drops in his solo. It's Billy's there. You can hear his bass, which really gives Jimi a lot of freedom. He's playing again with more feedback-laden lines. He's crying. There's just these cries and screams, and Jimi's continuing to build. He's ascending up the guitar neck, just searing lines. There's just an amazing feel here. More killer feedback, just more single note cries, if you will. Higher pitch moans. Billy's really punchy. Buddy's fired up. You can hear Buddy just, you'll hear him just sort of go off here and there just because he's so fired up. Jimi just sounds amazing. This is an incredible version of Foxy Lady. Again, I love the Band of Gypsies 2 version from the next night. This is an incredible version. So I highly recommend hearing it. Jimi, he just plays an incredible solo. He goes back to the chords. The re-entry is kind of slower and funkier, and then the tune just kind of ends. The song kind of ends, and then Jimi says, "Thank you very much and good night." And then the song ends into audience rapture, if you will. And then so the other omissions. So after Foxy Lady, there's sort of a break, and then the Band of Gypsies, they come back and play for an encore. They play Voodoo Child and Purple Haze. Those were left off. The box set for whatever reason. But so even though Experience Hendrix omitted 5 songs, and one of those, Burning Desire, was, it's a 10-minute song, and they only made it through 2.5 minutes. So I can see why they left that one off. But again, I'm just put it all out there, all warts and all. That's kind of where I'm at. But I just, let's kind of do our conclusion and talk about, again, this incredible show from Songs for Groovy Children, and specifically it was the December 31st, the second set of that night, and it was just an amazing concert, and I want to talk a little bit about the highlights for me. We'll go right back to the record sleeves. So for the first, this was on LP3. It was interesting to hear Fire, right? I mean, every song is a highlight. I can honestly say that. Who knows just has a little bit more of a playful edge than the Band of Gypsies version. We hear Fire, and you're thinking, geez, Buddy, he can barely play the song. I mean, he obviously can handle it. It's different. It's a different monster than what the Experience played. And then on side 2, pretty, again, another new song, Easy Rider. They handled it pretty well. They kind of bail on it, but then we get that masterful Machine Gun, and Machine Gun really is the highlight of this particular disc 3, if you will. And then moving on to disc 4, incredible version of Stone Free. I had not heard it until I listened to this earlier. It's just got a lot of improvisation. Jimmy's doing a lot of interesting things, and again, it's sort of I like how quiet the jam gets. Buddy gets a pretty extended solo, and then Jimi comes back, and they do a little bit of Sunshine of Your Love, and Stone Free, Stepping Stone, if you will. So there's a lot of interesting things going on. Buddy's song Changes, I thought, was played pretty well here. And then on the other side, Message to Love, again, really strong. It kind of fizzled out, but I love how it started. And the 2 highlights for me really Stop, because of that funk jam, and Foxy Lady. I mean, this version of Foxy Lady is definitely one of the better versions I've heard. Again, punctuated by Jimmy's searing guitar lines, feedback and tremolo manipulations. I mean, that's what I love about Hendrix, when he's hitting these high-pitched searing lines, and he's really cranking on his Stratocaster. That's to me, that's Jimi at his best. So I recommend this show. It's if you can get the box set, it is still readily available. You're going to hear the early and late shows from both nights, December 31st, 1969 and January 1st, 1970. These are amazing performances. Jimmy and his new band, they were on. I mean, they were on. It's cool to hear all this stuff. I mean, it was, mixed by Eddie Kramer, as always. The Experienced Hendrix team, Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Kramer, and John McDermott. Thank you for releasing this. You guys do a great job with Jimmy's Vault. Again, I wish things were complete. I would say release everything as is, just warts and all. I think the completists would appreciate it, but I understand where you guys are coming from. So yeah, I recommend that. I recommend the entire box, but again, I just wanted to review the Late Show because of that machine gun. I feel like that's Jimmy's one of his better versions, and I feel like it's a little underrated. The Next Night Show that made it onto the Band of Gypsies album is probably more famous for that reason, obviously, and it gets quoted by a lot of guitar players. A lot of guitar players love that version. I mean, I love it too, but this version hits me harder. It hits me differently. I want to show some of the pictures. This is the Band of Gypsies rehearsing backstage before the concert, probably the day before or the day of. This gentleman here, you'll see a gentleman standing in a black leather coat. That's Billy Cox's dad. So Billy Cox's dad was there for the show. And I guess there were some pretty strict rules. Like basically it was the only people out on stage were the Band of Gypsies and Billy Cox's dad, no one else. Here's the typical crowd at the Fillmore East. You can see tambourines, enjoying some of the New Year's revelry. Here's a nice shot of Jimmy getting down and dirty with his Strat. So yeah, some real famous pictures of this concert over the years. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of them. Here's a nice shot of Jimmy here. Shots like that where he's just. But yeah, these were special shows. I mean, the Fillmore East is a pretty small venue. I think the last performance he played at the Fillmore East before these shows may have been on the 10th of May in 1968 when he was with the Experience. And he may have sat in with Buddy Miles. I believe he did sit in with Buddy in 68 as well. But so here he is back with his new band. And, they're playing a lot of new music. We heard some Jimi Hendrix Experience music, but we also heard a lot of new Jimi Hendrix music. So just an exciting time and really fun to listen to that show. Again, going back to Lifelines, I just love that version of Machine Gun. It's one of my favorite versions, so it's really nice. And it was nice to hear, some of the other stuff that I had not heard, like Stone Free, had not heard that until today. And then the real highlights for me on side 2, The Stop, some just incredible funk, and Foxy Lady, just an incredible version of Foxy Lady. So, well, that's it, guys. There you have it. You have, we just reviewed December 31st, 1969, The Late Show from the Band of Gypsies, Songs for Groovy Children, the 8 LP box set released in 2019. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Please subscribe and like. And I want to give you a preview. We will continue on. I was able to find a copy of the Jimi Hendrix Experience at the LA Forum in 1970. So that will be our next show, our next review, if you will. This is going to be a bootleg recording. So it's the bootleg is called from an audience recording. It's not going to be a soundboard, but some of the audience recordings I've heard are very good. So it will be a different listening experience. But I'm very excited to listen to that show and share it with you guys as well. And that will conclude our Jimi Hendrix in LA series. And this was, this was a special holiday version, especially, being New Year's tomorrow. And I thought it'd be fun to listen to the Band of Gypsies, their Late Show, December 31st, 1969. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope you have a safe, happy, and healthy New Year. And I look forward to seeing you next time.